All right, fishing family, I'm going to be covering a topic today that I feel like is one of the most important, overlooked strategies that you can incorporate into your methodology when it comes to winter creek fishing. We have a ton to cover. Let's get right into this. All right, fishing family, welcome back to another episode of Winter Quest. This series is dedicated specifically to winter creek fishing and how we can put all these puzzle pieces together so that we can have some level of success fishing these creeks during winter. Not everybody has a boat, or not everybody has a kayak. Some of us are just stuck with creeks. Hey, we can figure this out and still fish these creeks from December to March and have some success. So the topic I'm going to be covering today is how to find the right spots in creeks. Now, a lot of people think, man, I know what to do. You find the deep spot. Well, that's really a 30,000 foot view when it comes to winter creek fishing. There are a lot more strategies when it comes to locating these spots, and we're going to break these down today. All right, so before we get into the strategies, let's actually break down and understand the fish's behavior in this cold water out here. In the winter months, everybody knows their metabolism is going to slow down. They're not going to need as much food, and they're not going to be moving around. So we can use that to our advantage, because these fish, once they get to their wintering spots, more than likely they're going to stay there for an extended period of time. They might even stay there through the entire winter. Now, you might have a situation where the waters get elevated and some flood waters happen, and maybe they're in a situation to where they have to move to a different section of the creek. Or maybe not. Sometimes I think these smallies and largemouth will find sections in the creeks to where they have undercuts or they have rocks. They'll even get themselves back in those spots and actually probably wedge themselves in when those waters get elevated, and they can just sit there and wait it out until the water recedes. So now that we know that information, let's really start breaking down kind of the items that in the creeks that's going to be optimal for these fish. So we know the deep spot. That's an absolute given. All right, fishing family, so we're back to talking strategy. Once again, how many of these points can we put in our favor to hopefully increase our odds of catching these fish? We basically want to find those pockets that have the best possibility of holding them in here. That way we've got a better chance of catching them. Selecting the right lure and all that other stuff doesn't matter if we're fishing pockets where the fish are not holding up. All right, the reason that I selected this one for today was for a couple factors. So we're in about a 5-day cool down period right now. It's got down to 24 last night, so I figured these fish would be shut down, and I'm going to have to really work it slow. So therefore, I really had to focus on areas where I thought, where can I have the best opportunity at catching these fish? And so stained water will warm up faster. West side of the bank will hold sun. If you've got rock over there, that's going to hold heat in it. This far side, I've got rock that's all lining over there. This is the west side of the creek, so it's getting all this sun exposure during the day. Also, I don't have a lot of tree cover here, so therefore it's getting sunlight on it all day long. As you can see here too, I've got a lot of leaf debris, and I've got mud in here. Your sections that are muddy are going to be warmer than your sections that are rocky. Same thing goes for stained water. Stained water will warm up faster than crystal clear water will. So keep those items in mind. Once again, we're trying to use these strategies to help us figure out where these fish are going to be active on any given day, because we can't determine what the weather's going to be. I can't determine, hey, I don't want it to get down to 24 tonight. It's going to. Well, then if I want to fish the next day, the only thing that I can do is try to figure out, what can I do in the creek? Where can I go to increase the odds that I may catch a fish? All right, so I'm going to break down my strategy about how I go about fishing creeks in the winter. First off, I'm going to look at the weather patterns. I'm going to see where are we at. So 5 days ago, we were a little warm, but now we've gone into a 5-day cool spell. So we've been cooling down. Last night got down to about 24. And today it's only going to get up to about a high of 38 late in the afternoon, and then we're going to drop back down cold again. So that tells me these fish are going to be cold. can I use that information to go target either a certain creek or a certain section in the creek to increase my odds of catching fish? I think that I can. Once again, these fish are cold. If I can put them in a section where they're warmer, they're going to possibly be more active. So I want to target those spots within the creek that give me that possibility. All right, so one thing I may look for are where secondary creeks come into a primary creek. And on this creek that I'm fishing today, I'm going to be fishing a section further down that has something very similar to that. It actually is a spring-fed creek. And this is something I learned last year because I actually brought a thermometer out here and was testing the water. Well, during the summer months, the spring-fed creek is feeding in really cold water into the primary creek that I'm fishing. So the secondary creek is about 15 degrees colder. And where it spills in for the next 3 straights on the main primary creek, those water levels drop a lot. And I find that during the summer months, I have less activity in those sections. Maybe because the colder, I don't know. I've always thought that the fish would go there for relief, but for whatever reason, they don't. So I went there last winter, had a thermometer out there that day with me, and I was testing. And to my surprise, it was the inverse. So now the primary creek out here was probably 10 degrees colder than that spring-fed creek. And as a result, where that secondary creek was spilling in, there were smallies stacked up right there in that area. So the difference in 10 degrees, that feels so different to them. And I'll even tell you a story. all right, fish tales from the creek. I got a good one for you. So when I was little, I went on a church retreat. We went down to the Hiwassee to do a 5-mile float in inner tubes. And I had never been to the Hiwassee. I'd gotten down there with our church, and I was sitting there with my dad. And of course, being a little 7-year-old kid, I was being impatient. I asked Dad, I was like, can I go down there and jump in the water, Dad? I'm kind of tired of sitting here. And he said, sure enough, go on down there. Well, I run on down there, think nothing of it. All of a sudden, I just go in, do the big old cannonball, go boom. It about caught me off guard. That water was about 55 degrees. It was 101 degrees that day, and I thought someone was going to have to drag me out of there. It just caught me off guard. My body went into shock. And so by the time I come out, I was already purple. I seriously wasn't. That's not a lie. So anyway, we're floating, and lunchtime, we come to this little secondary creek where we're going to stop and go get some sandwiches. Well, I remember swimming into that secondary creek and feeling like, this is bath water. Oh my gosh, this feels so good. And I was in there just playing around. I got out, eat our lunch, and then after lunch, after it already dried off, I came back to that little secondary creek to go back out to the Hiwassee so we could continue our float. And when I stepped my toe in it, I was like, oh, this is cold. What? Wait a minute. And then it dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute. This felt like bath water compared to what the Hiwassee did. And now here I'm in this secondary creek. It's already cold, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be bad. And sure enough, I got it at the Hiwassee, and it was freezing. That was the most miserable trip I've ever done. I mean, we weren't in, your butt was in the water all day long. By the time I was froze to death. I'm serious, it was this big. So my point being is just the difference in that 10-degree temperature. I mean, I could see how much better it felt for me that day when I first got into that initially. So these smallmouth will actually use those same setups, and we can find these secondary creeks that come in that are spring fed. It's very likely that that water temperature might be 5 to 10 degrees difference, and that alone may hold those fish right there at that mouth. Of course, when it comes to deep pools, we are also looking for that slower moving water. That's going to help a lot. Faster moving water is going to be cooler than that slower water. So we definitely want to find those sections where we had that. We also want to look for sections where we're going through choke points, where maybe we're going from a shallow section that has a lot of rock into it that spills into a deeper, slower section. So what that's going to do is provide a section to where you may have bait fish up there in those shallower sections. Because during the winter months, when all your aquatic grasses and stuff go dormant, these fish have to end up using depth as their protection. So they'll come out on those little shallow areas, that areas where they can bask. That water may warm up in there. So while our smallies are going to use the deeper pocket, on those warmer days, they've got a very short distance that they've got to move to go feed, and then they can move right back into those deeper areas. Another thing that you can look for that I found out by mistake in the season 1 were bluff walls. Bluff walls are a great area to fish, especially if you can find a bluff wall that runs up to your creek that's on the west facing side of the creek. That way, when your sun rises in the east, you're getting all that sun exposure all day long on that bluff wall. That bluff wall will hold that heat, and it could increase that water temperature just a little bit. So you may have those fish migrating over to that bluff wall side. 2, if it's in a bend, that may be your deeper section. Ideal. That's so perfect. So that's something to look for. 2, bluff walls. Just through the normal erosion and freeze thaw that happened over the years, you could have a good amount of chunky rock that has fallen from those bluff walls. It's down there in that section. Now you've got the current that those smallmouth are looking for. All right, so let's put some of these puzzle pieces together so you guys can kind of see my strategy. We're on a 5-day cool down phase here. So I feel like the fish are going to be lethargic. So I want to go target deep areas, slow water. If I can find an area that's got a muddy bottom and stained water, it's likely that those water temperatures will be warmer. If I can find a bluff wall, chunky rock, I want that as well. The more of those factors that I can put into my quiver, then the more likely I've got a chance of actually getting a fish, if that makes sense. So the more factors that I can put in my favor, all that I'm doing is increasing the probability that I'm going to find the fish that are holding out in those wintering holes. So let's look for these things. All right, I want to give you another tip that I think will really help you. This is something that I kind of stumbled upon last week, and this will be a very specific situation, but once again, during winter, if this happens, you can use this. I want to show you this footage, and you start thinking through what I'm doing, and let's see at the end of this footage if you figure out what it is. All right, fish family, I'm gonna try to get out here for about an hour. It rained here Friday, Saturday night, and a little bit this morning. So the creeks are pretty elevated, kind of to the point to where it's not safe for me to walk through them. So I've got private access that I can get to a couple banks, and I'm gonna see if I can just get a couple fish in this current. It's moving, but it's not totally discolored, so that's good. We're just gonna see if I can get some bites in these winter months when the current's strong. All right, let's get to it. All right, guys, it's raining. The only thing I had in chartreuse was a Placino 4-inch tube. I've got these rigged up on my Tyler Stout jig heads. Hey, and we got a smallie. Yeah, baby. All right, so let me explain what I did. So this current is churning right now. I'm actually having to keep my cameras face down just to keep the water off of them. But right on the outside, there's a seam line right here. I just cast it right here in this more slack water because I knew that those smallies would be setting out of that current, just watching anything getting dislodged there. And sure enough, man, boom, WinterQuest smallie, yeah! Stop raining just for a second. Got water running all down the back of my neck. All right, so another thing that I've done, I've intentionally positioned myself upstream. This current is moving so fast that even with a 5/32 Ned jig head, it's going to cruise, especially if I'm casting upstream and my line gets in that current, it's just pulling it too fast. It's winter, we need to work this bait slow. I don't like the presentation that it's going to provide, but I'm positioning myself up here so that I can pull this jig along this seam line here and work it slower. And I've got my first fish, so at least it seems like it's working. So I'm gonna stick with that method today, especially with this current. Little bitty guy, first cast. He's tiny, good night, he's tiny. First cast in this pocket, I did get a little bitty guy. Had I not cut this down by about an inch, I'm pretty certain I would have got a short strike. So, got a bite, let's see. Oh yeah! Oh my goodness, this is a good one. He ran and hit it. Oh wow, man, he chased it. Come here, buddy. Come here. Another one. Look at that. Look at that. He did the same thing. He come up now. He's not as big, but he come up and popped it too. Another one. Oh my gosh, dude. This is great. Four, back to back. It's a little bit bigger. Come here. This is another little bitty guy, but real quick. Let's not tear your drone. There we go. All right, another little bitty guy. All right, so based on that footage that you just watched, we're dealing with elevated water levels. The water temperature wasn't super cold, but based on that information, here's what I figured out. During those times when it warms up just a little bit, those fish are going to get a little bit more active. And with that elevated water, the bait fish has to seek shelter wherever they can find slack water. That day, I tested every spot that I was in that creek that had slack water, and I got bite after bite after bite. It just proved to me at that point that those smallies are following those bait fish, and on that warmer day with that elevated water level, they were taking advantage knowing that those small minnows were going to be schooled up in that slack water, and they were in there busting them to pieces. I'm telling you what, I didn't even have to give them any time. I was actually retrieving that stick bait back through the water fast, and they were chasing it down. So use that strategy. Once again, if you've been on a little bit of a warm-up cycle, you've had some rain, once the water has crested and starts to retreat, go find those pockets where you're looking for slack water. You still want the water to be flowing because you want those bait fish to be seeking refuge in those slack pockets. And if those bait fish are in there, those smallies will know it, and they will be in there feeding their bellies up. All right, so let's start putting all these puzzle pieces together. So we're talking deep sections, slow moving water, tons of sun exposure, potentially a rock bluff on one side that all that sun exposure is also going to heat that rock up, and it's going to absorb that heat and retain that heat throughout the day. I want to find a muddy bottom if possible. Leaf debris, some of these things that creates insulation in those creeks. Those fish will also use that to kind of get down in and warm themselves up. They'll get down in that mud. I've got a buddy, my buddy Greg, he does this creek fishing as well during winter. If you haven't seen his channel, you need to go check it out because he's a wealth of knowledge as well. But he even tells me a lot of the creeks that he fishes up in Indiana are muddy bottoms. He will even pull bass out and their bellies will just be coated with mud where they've gotten and just worked themselves down in that mud. I can see that working because just the insulation versus sitting on a cold slab of rock, that mud is going to insulate them, even that leaf debris that's left over in there. So that's something else to look for. All right, guys, this may not seem like a big issue, but it really is to me an important topic that I think people overlook when it comes to winter creek fishing. You can choose the right bait, you can be on the day that's warm, you can do all these other things that you can control. Then you've got the things you can't control, like the weather, but you go to a spot that you've selected and there's no fish holding out in there because it's just not the right conditions to hold those fish for winter. It doesn't matter what you're fishing with. You're not going to catch fish because they're not there. So take the time, think through these strategies. Once again, it may take a little bit for you to locate some of these wintering holes. It did for me. First winter I covered, I guarantee you, probably 75 miles throughout certain creeks in total over a 3-month period. I was trying everything I possibly could, and then I found those wintering holes, and now I found the ones that did produce. I'll go back and retest them later on. The following season, I'll do the same thing, and that's how you build on this. All right, so I want to use all these strategies so that I can determine what's going to be the best possible creek and section in that creek for me to fish on that given day based on those weather patterns, so that I could potentially get out there and still have a stellar day, even though these fish are lethargic and it's cold, because I have found the warmest spot that I can find in that given creek. All right, fishing family, I hope this information helps you guys. Once again, we want to keep building on this knowledge. Next week, I'm going to really start breaking down into different baits that you can use. I hope by the end of this season, we've got a good series put together that's really going to cover a lot of topics that's going to help you guys be really productive when it comes to winter creek fishing. Guys, I can't thank you enough for tuning in. Thank you so much, and until next time, grab your poles, call up your buddies, get out there, make some memories, and give me some elbow. I love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to Winter Quest. Hey, we'll see you next week.
Won't you hold on? I said, baby, just hold on.